Yasas. What happens when you take two vibrant brothers that are descendants from the Greeks in Constantinople, embracing their American roots, and then ask them to serve up rich tales of traditions, cuisine, childhood memories, and a hearty dose of humor? You're about to find out. This is Baklavine Banter, your passport to all things Greek.
Hey, and welcome to Baklava and Banter. I'm Petraki,
And I'm Soto.
and this is our special edition of Baklava and Banter, where we're going to review Big Fat Greek Wedding 3.
Oh, yeah.
It was a great night last night watching it, the preview night. So, what do you think?
I think, well, first, I still think, and you and I have chatted about this before, I think the first one, the original, kind of drew the line in the sand for me, and I think even for, when you listen to Nia talk about it, kind of draw a line in the sand and show that you can actually not only make a rom-com where a Greek family is the basis as opposed to Italian families and so forth, but it is still ranked the highest rom-com family. We were introduced to a whole bunch of characters, all very interesting and so forth. I think to me, and the second one, kind of the evolution of the marriage between Dula and Ian, and them having a daughter and the struggles of being a parent, that's good. I think this one, for me, it has an interesting place. I think this is the evolution of Nia, not only as a scriptwriter, but she actually directed this one. And I think bringing it back to Greece is sort of the exclamation and point from where she started. What was it, 2002, I think?
Yeah,
To now.
2003, yeah.
And so, there are things that we're going to talk a little bit about that I would have done differently, that I would have liked to seen. But I think in terms of the cinematography, I think in terms of the story she was trying to tell about family, about immigrants having to leave their homeland and go to another country, and so forth, was I like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. This story, this movie is, I mean, the comedy aspects are there, but it's more of a drama with some comedy thrown into it. I think you definitely see the evolution of all the characters here.
Right.
um Whether it be the character of Tula or her brother Nick, to even her husband Ian, from where we started 20 years ago to where we are now. um you know uh, the main takeaway from this is, I think, when you get it's this is like, this movie is really layered. There's a lot of different layers here. Like you and I had talked before, this movie's roughly 92, 93 minutes, so an hour and a
Right.
half. I think if they added 15 minutes to this movie, perhaps even 20, I think that it would have really added to the story as a whole. But we'll get to that a little bit later. I mean, I think they did a really good job from the opening credits, kind of showing you photos, almost like a photo album,
Right.
or a scrapbook, because the premise of this movie is they're going to take their father's scrapbook back to Greece to his three friends
Right.
that they grew up in the village together. So in the opening scene, they created this almost like a montage of photos. Now, throughout taken from the, like, screenshots from all the two previous movies. But what was, if you paid attention to that montage, they did a really nice job where they have Michael Constantine, who plays, Gus, the patriarch of the family, and Lani Kazan, who
Yeah.
plays the mother, and they almost like created a photo of them 40 years ago sitting at a kitchen table eating dinner together,
Right.
which I thought was really well done. And then after that, it's followed up where, for those of you who haven't followed or didn't know, since the the second movie, Michael Constantine has since passed away. That's how that plot got written into the story. But they have a picture of him and Bruce Gray, who plays Ian's father, who passed away a year after the second installment.
Right.
And they kind of fade out their picture. So if you knew nothing about this movie, it is right there implied that both of them have passed away. And then later on, with the scene with Nia and John, where they're sitting, almost like this is like their first time away, and she tells them how difficult it was since they both lost their father within the last year. So it's kind of like it's kind of like the undercurrent that kind of runs through this. Again, let's just start. So the scene, the movie opens up, and again, there's some scenes that go too fast in this, and there's other scenes that just go a little too slow. The open scene is, they're sitting there, their mother is there, Tula's there with Ian, her sister Athena's there with her husband, and they're sitting in the scene where, they're saying goodbye to their mother, and then, with their mother, Maria, they dive into a little bit of reality with the sense of their mother has a little bit of Alzheimer's,
Right.
where she's starting to forget, but she's blowing it off like any Greek mother would, like she's fine. And she has moments of clarity and moments that she doesn't remember. And then she kind of gets in and out of it. And then the next thing, they're sitting in a cab going to the airport.
Yeah.
It's just, there could have been another scene stuck in there. But then next thing you know, we're at the airport. All of the family's there to say goodbye to them. And there's a funny scene where they're in the, what do you call that?
The revolving
door.
security
And they're all
door. Yeah.
stuck in the revolving door.
Right.
Very funny,
Yeah.
It's, very reminiscent, as we saw, how family is everything. And, even though when we take people to the airport, that's how we have to, the whole family is going to come to the airport, And then we get to where they're on the airplane. And, so it's, Aunt Vula's husband, Daki, it's funny because he says, well, you're going to need to Ian, gives them snacks for the plane. And it's like snacks for the plane.
Right.
And he is over there trying to bring them on the plane. In the meantime, while they're boarding, we have Aunt Vula, trying to pass around the souvlaki,
Yeah.
and then you have Nick sitting on the PA system saying, hey, anybody seen souvlaki, very,
Right.
There's some funny moments in there. But the next thing you know, again, is moves very quickly from that scene, and we're landing in Athens.
Right.
Now, the
Right.
only thing I'm going to say about that, so when you land in Athens, the way they made it seem is you come out of the airport and there's the Acropolis.
Right.
That's not how reality is. But listen, that's poetic, poetic freedom there. That's creative freedom there, how you want to do it. But,
Yeah. The other thing about the movie that we were talking about earlier is that I think is interesting is that the entire movie was actually filmed in Greece.
Yeah.
So even the scenes, I saw Nia did an interview where they were asking her about locations, and she said a couple of things that were interesting. One was that, her production designer, whose name is Yannis Sotiropoulos, which I thought was awesome. He basically converted at least one of the gates in the airport in Athens to look like one of the gates in O'Hare when they were leaving, right? Because they filmed it all on site. And then she also talked about, trying to find that neoclassical architecture within Athens and so forth that's indicative of that. She talked about wanting to, always wanted to film in sort of that center of Athens that stretches at the bottom of the Acropolis and so forth, which is
Hmm.
the scene that you saw in that one area. Um, but yeah, I think to your point about the opening of the movie and so forth, there's never, especially with this movie and those little things that if you pay attention, you notice that you pointed out with the way they did the montage and the two fathers that have both happened to pass away in real life. That string of trying to tie it back to family,
Hmm.
almost regardless to a certain point of where we think there may have been holes in the plot that, to your point about adding some time, could have defined him a little more. That sense of trying to tell a story about the trials and tribulations of this family that people learned to love from the first one is certainly there, and you see it over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. Now I have to say, once they got, I think they did with the filming in Greece, especially around Athens. When they're making their way to the village.
Yeah,
I think I don't know. Part of me feels like it was a little stereotypical in how they did that, where you got to show the Parthenon, the Olympic Stadium, or the Juliadis, at the tomb there.
yeah,
Um, I just thought, I get it. I understand why you did it. It's like I said, it's like, oh, they want to show, but and then all of a sudden, they got to stop and take a dip real quick, and I just thought that was kind of like, okay, why? But
yeah,
you're going to an island. You're going to be plenty of time to swim. I just don't. I just didn't. I didn't. Not that it bothered me. I just thought it was filling up space. I thought that time could have been used a little better and maybe drilling down a little more on the characters themselves.
yeah,
Because when the movie starts off, the first 20 minutes you're thinking comedy, but then all of a sudden it starts really getting a little more serious tone to it, especially once they get to the village.
right,
Um, and the mayor, which is this 20 something millennial, 20, 30-year old woman who now the mayor of this town. Um, and then when they get to the town, it's almost abandoned.
right,
uh for all practical sense, it's abandoned. Well, what did they
yeah,
say? There's only 6 people that live there.
right,
um but no, and then I think, and then they go ahead and they throw in that, like, that special surprise where they're walking through town, and this, I don't want to call her angry, but almost an overprotective protector of the village, which could be anybody's yaya or mother, Greek mother, named Alexandria in the movie, makes an appearance, and right away she asks, like, "Who are you?" And you know, sh- Tula Goza explains that who her father was you know Costas Portocalis, and you know, she says to her, "You're like her." She asks, "Are you his daughter?" And he's like, "Yeah." And she goes, "I came." In Greek, she goes ahead, says, I came within a chin hair away from being your mother," which you're kind of looking at that, and you're like, okay, well, obviously, these two had a relationship somewhere down earlier before he came to to America, before he immigrated to America. And then, as they move in, because there's no hotels, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna put you in the biggest house to share. You're gonna sleep together, in cots." How it worked out to be in the biggest house in the village, which I thought was kind of an interesting scene altogether, because this town's kind of abandoned, but here they are pulling out mattresses. Like, there's not a speck of dust on these mattresses. Like, where were they storing these mattresses? And I'm not trying to overanalyze this. I'm just kind of
yeah,
looked at it, and I almost felt like, in that scene alone, I felt like I'm waiting for, like, Shaggy and Scooby to come out because the place is haunted.
yeah. I
But
think. I
Yeah,
think
go
the
ahead.
other thing too is when you mentioned, taking the ride to get on the boat to go to the island and so forth, to go to
Yeah.
the village and then jumping in the water. I think part of what was also coming across, and then their kind of antics in the village, is they really came across as excited to be in Greece because they hadn't been before, right? They talk about
Hmm.
not taking a vacation, and B, kind of the city slickers, right? They live in Chicago. Now
Yeah.
all of a sudden they come to this village where everything is very, like, if you remember, hey, do you have a shower? Oh yeah, it's right over there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
An outdoor shower and everything. So but I get it. The poetic license.
Yeah.
But Yeah. So that's, and I think the other thing about the movie is because in the beginning, I think in sort of setting it up for where you wanted to take the audience,
Hmm.
it sped up. I think at some point, once they were obviously in the village, and once the story started to evolve,
Yeah.
now it went from, okay, I get this in the beginning, let's get to the next
Yeah.
interesting parts. But then I almost felt there's a lot of areas in the, say, the last third of the movie. I mean, you talked about extending the end, that I would have liked to have seen a little more development around, because
Sure.
that's where it really
Yeah.
became interesting for a number of reasons, right?
Yeah. And what I'm glad they didn't do is they didn't say we were going to Greece for a month. They didn't say we're going for 2 weeks. They're there for an unknown number of days or weeks. So we don't know the time frame and this all
Right,
played out.
right.
You know, they kind of make it seem like they arrived and is maybe like a week. They arrived early, so it's like maybe a week later, maybe 10 days passed. You really don't know. So,
Right. And I don't know if you mentioned this already, but they got an invitation for a reunion,
right, right,
which is what, and part of that was to, as you said in the beginning, to give their father scrapbook, their journal, to his three friends at his
right,
request before he passed.
right.
Yep.
Um, again, throughout this, uh, you know, we have to give out a shout out to Andrea Martin, who plays
Oh my God.
Aunt Vula. Like, I think her character in all three movies is as consistent can get. And as she says, um, in all the movies that she'll be our favorite. She is our favorite.
Yeah.
She's so for us personally, she's very relatable.
Oh,
Um, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I just wanted to say that. So the little like twist they ended up putting on this is that this woman Alexandria. It turns out that this is, by the way, this is going to be a what's the word I'm looking for here?
spoiler.
Yeah, thank you. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
So what turns out is this woman had a relationship with their father Gus, and she ended up having a son. And Tula and Nick find this out that now they have a brother, a half brother, who then kind of plays into this thing, who has a son himself, who then they throw in a little geopolitics into this, who's in love with a refugee from Syria. Now, I don't know for you, but for me, I kind of like was kind of drawn into the story itself and how she was developing these characters because she was really starting to drill down a little bit on them. I forgot about the whole wedding aspect of this until the wedding showed up and I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is big fat Greek. Well, this is the big fat Greek wedding." You
Right.
know?
Right.
Um, again, this thing was layered. Like there's a lot of different layers. And then on a completely different layer, we look at their daughter Paris, who her parents view her, put her on such uh I guess on a high perch. And then we find out, she's kind of struggling and we don't exactly know why she's struggling, how she doesn't really want to at the beginning, she doesn't really want to go on this trip. And then later on in the movie, we find out her angst is all about she's not doing well academically. And I think there is a sense of failure there in a way where uh, her parents have set expectations so high that she feels that she's a failure because she's not meeting those expectations. I wish they had drilled down a little bit more on that, a little bit. But the fact what I took away from that is how you have uh, Nia's character of Tula, how she wanted to get in there and kind of drill down on it and be up all on her business.
Right.
And Ian kind of like balanced her out, says, no, 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 we can't do that.
Right.
Let's just let her kind of figure out for herself. And then they kind of, it was brought up, and then they kind of put it to the side because then they kind of went to her rebuilding her relationship with Aristotle in this.
Right, her boyfriend.
Her boyfriend.
They did say, she did finally say though, and this I wanted to mention because for me personally this really resonates. She said she didn't do well academically because she was partying.
Yeah.
And you get the idea that, and this is where I can relate to this.
Oh yeah.
She was away from her house when she went to college for the first time, because in the movie they live in Chicago, she went to NYU. And it was the thrill of being away.
Yeah.
Which yours truly also did not do well the first year being away, and also for me being shy and so forth. And so I totally relate, and I'm wondering I'm not wondering. I think that's probably intentional with the way that was scripted from Nia, because it shows sometimes, especially with Greek parents, and we see this not just with Greeks, you hear about it with Indians, Jewish parents, and so forth, being just so much pressure to succeed that you get to the point where, to your point, you feel like a failure. But then when you dig into it, you're like, well, I balanced, I'm going to school, but now I have an opportunity to kind of do my thing for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
I'm going to choose that. And only then do you come back around again when your parents finally understand that, which I think is where we evolved to in the movie, to say, okay, we've got that out of the way. And so I agree with you. I think that was interesting how they played that.
Yeah, I think it was well done. I just wish they drilled down on it just a little bit more. I mean, there's and I'm just gonna skip ahead a little bit. Like, I think there was an opportunity when they landed back home, for all practical sense. I think there could have been one little scene at the end there. You know, but it is what it is. So moving along, so another interesting, like I was saying earlier, was the development of Nick. Remember, at the first movie, Nick really had, he works at the diner, kind of almost destined that was going to be his life. And then because of Tula going to school, he wanted then at the end of the movie almost like go to school to be like, because he liked to draw, to be like a graphic artist. Kind of trying to find his little niche in the world, because I think for him, he viewed like his career path was set, that he was going to run this diner and follow in his father's footsteps. But here we are now, 20 years later, his father now deceased, and it almost looks, he goes back and thinks about, I think, even though it's unsaid and there's really nothing pertaining to this, I think that it was important to him to continue his father's legacy. So the part of the movie, and this is one of the only parts I'm really gonna ding in this, is, they, in the beginning scene where we know that Gus has passed away, they cremated him. And what kind of a little bit, I don't want to say angered me, it frustrated me a little bit in this, is because in the Greek Orthodox Church, cremation is not allowed.
Yeah.
So I know they probably did it for the sake of the movie, because Nick actually smuggles the urn into Greece, so that he could spread his ashes, or some of his ashes, underneath this tree that his father told him about years ago.
Right.
And how much time he spent about it. I I get it because it's about storytelling. I would rather me personally have them if he had something made from the tree that he wanted to return from the wood of the tree and have it return to him.
Right.
Because then going back, we were talking about what scenes we would have loved. I would have loved to them uh, to have a scene before they went to the airport. We saw how ostentatious their house was in the first movie with the fountains
Yeah.
and the Greek flag painted on
Yeah.
the garage and their pride of where they came from. That they actually had a scene where, you know, Nick and Tula went to the cemetery and they drive up and there's this mausoleum that looks like a mini Acropolis there. It says Portacales. And for them just to kind of acknowledge their father in the sense, hey, she was clinging on to a scrapbook and be like, we're finally gonna go back and do what you asked us to do um so long ago, I think that would have added a little bit more to the death, but again, nobody consulted me on this movie, so it is what it is on this.
Yeah.
But then, they go ahead, the movie continues, where the movie ends up where they talk about um cousins and they're talking about their family and eventually Angelo and cousin Nikki, who are, for those of you who don't remember, are Aunt Vula's kids. They're looking for his three friends who now are for their father's three friends who's now who they're in their 80s. And there's a scene where, which again I would have loved for them to drill down on this, where they're Tula's trying her hardest to figure out where these three guys are since they've left the village. And then there's this little kind of side scene, and it's only the whole scenes. It's two scenes where Ian, walks down to the coast and he finds this little home, little hut with a monk, and he starts talking to this monk, and all of a sudden he comes out of the scene with the names and addresses of where everybody dispersed through around Greece. Now, I found this scene really, really amusing because 20 years ago, here we have Ian Miller, an atheist,
Right.
and now we've seen him now 20 years later sitting in Greece talking to a Greek monk, and I thought, wow, like that's really interesting. Like, has over the last 20 years, has he found some faith? Has he found something that says, I'm a believer now? I would really, really love to have seen a couple of more 2 or 3 minutes just to see those conversations. Because the conversation basically goes, the monk going, oh, I wish I knew more Greek. But what I do know, and he says, oh, to the monk, he goes, Tafkaristo. And then the monk in English goes, oh, you're welcome. So it's kind of like, okay, that kind of just didn't make sense to me how that played out.
And these are some of the questions that I would love at some point to ask Nia directly in terms of her thought process, because I think it's fascinating. To me, that scene, the other way to look at it from Ian's perspective, which again is another part of this movie, I think, maybe it's just the idea of acceptance. Maybe it's the idea that I'm an atheist, right? In Ian, I don't necessarily believe in any religion, but this idea of being part of a family and being brought into a culture after 20 years. Because the other thing that is interesting from the perspective of what happens over one given time is, I think Nick beating up on Ian from the first movie, I think grows old, right? You finally get the sense that Ian isn't bothered. And as a matter of fact, at the end of the movie, there's a funny scene where Ian gets back at Nick when they land at the airport.
Yeah.
But I think that's the other way to look at it. But to your point, you're right. I think that's an interesting scene for a number of reasons. Because remember, Ian also, when they came to the village and they were in the house that you mentioned earlier, people started knocking on the door and giving him stuff. And Ian took a bunch of that stuff to the monk and said, people gave these to us and now I want to give them to you. And again, that's again at least the way that I read some of these scenes, where from a pure scene storytelling perspective, it could have been expanded or a little more clarity. But if you look at the undertone as I mentioned earlier, of I think what Neo is trying to get across. To me, that scene can also be seen as a sense of acceptance.
Yeah.
So
And just one more scene I just want to touch on is that there's a scene where Nick is sitting there having a discussion with his newly found half brother, and
yeah,
they're kind of talking about
yeah,
the friction that Ian and Tula had about her marrying Xeno is the same conversation where Nick's new brother named Peter um is having the same feelings about here's his son. He wants to continue the tradition of he wants him to marry a Greek girl, but here he is going to marry a Xeno in a Syrian refugee here. Um, and they start talking about it, and then the next scene or two, you see Nick and Peter coming up, and his son is sitting there with his girlfriend, the Syrian refugee girlfriend, and he walks up to him and just says and gives him a hug and says, "Okay to get married." I would have loved to seen how he got from point A to point Z on what Nick said to him
yeah,
to say to him, "Hey," and in the same breath, uh, Peter's mother Alexandria to come about and find out because she finally says it's okay, you can marry her, and how she came to terms with it. Again, if we had a couple more scenes in here, I think we would have had a little bit more complete story. Um, but other than that, listen, guys. One last thing that we want to talk about. This soundtrack is great.
oh,
I think
uh,
from beginning to end, this is a really good soundtrack. And I'm not telling you to go run out and buy it. Listen, go to Amazon Music, listen to it
it's
on
actually.
there.
I looked it up this morning. You can actually find the songs on Spotify if you have a Spotify account.
Great, and it really is. I think the music helps tell the story. Um, I think one of the better scenes is when the mayor, who's still young and in the party sees middle of the night gets Apostle in Paris, and they go to a club on the other side of the island, which I
Yeah,
was just like, I think this represented a pretty good island party scene.
yeah. The mayor.
But
The mayor is Victory, by the way, was her name in the movie. Yeah,
victory, correct,
yeah.
correct.
Um,
Go ahead.
I was going to just add to the soundtrack, which I think I told you. Again, these are just tidbits that I found interesting. So the last song in the movie is called Olimazi, which
Yeah,
means altogether. So a couple of interesting things about this. The song was co-written by the Diane Warren. If you know Diane Warren, she's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. She's wrote some of the most famous songs for other artists throughout for decades. Um, and the song is actually sung by Christos Mastoras, and it's sung with, it's a duet. When you listen to it, the English part is Rita Wilson,
yeah,
Tom Hanks' wife. And both of them, and actually in the credits at the beginning, it shows Tom Hanks as executive producer. And if you recall, it was Tom and Rita that sort of initially kind of found the talent that is Nia Bardalos and the script and produced, I think, all of the movies from the beginning. So I thought that was interesting too. And she's a pretty good singer. So
yeah, yeah. Overall, like, listen, listen. Reviewers are going to be reviewers. We're coming in this. Our review here, we're coming from a little different angle,
yeah,
from somebody sitting in New York City who has their only idea is of Greek culture is the Anthora coffee cup. So, or they go to Astoria and have some souvlaki. Um, Overall, guys, here at Baklava and Banjer, we have, when we're going to review movies, we have what we call Baklaview ratings,
that's right.
and it's a scale of 1 to 4. Um, of pieces of baklava. Me personally, on a scale of 1 to 4, I'm giving this a 2.5 pieces. What are you giving it?
Yeah, I think 2.5. I may even push it to 3. But again, I think to your point about why we're doing this differently is you could break out the storyline and look at it just from a script perspective and so forth. I think to me and what we try to achieve in these episodes and the conversations we had with Shelley Papadopoulos in one of the episodes about Greek culture, I think what Nia has done here and continues to do up to this point is establish Greek culture, Greek actors, actresses, and so forth as something to be aware of, and not just the stereotypes of what we see.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, you know, you take our rating, don't not go and see it. I mean, I personally, regardless of movie I'm watching,
Yeah.
I look at the reviews. If I really want to see it, I go see it and form my own opinions. But definitely go see it, not just because of whether it was better or worse than the first two.
Yeah.
Go and see it and see if you get some of the same vibes. And like everything else we do on the show, we'd love to hear from you. It's actually opening today, correct?
Yeah, it's actually opening today. Yeah.
Across the markets.
Yeah.
But yeah, from that perspective, I
So
think
I'm just gonna say this as we go to wrap it up now. Me personally, I really didn't go in this with any expectations.
Right.
I personally just was hoping that it was better than the second one. It's kind of hard to repeat the success of the first one, but with that being said, it far exceeded any expectations I may have had, considering being better than the second one. I think, like I said, this is a lot. This is like layers of baklava here. Layers. There's so much here. I just wish there was a little bit more time given to tell the story, to make it a little bit more complete. But other than that, Nia, great job. You should be proud of the stories you've done. You should be proud of this trilogy. I think that anybody sees this, you've really done well in depicting or showing a partial depiction of what Greek family life is about and how it's a core to our own existence.
Yeah, I can't say enough about the same thing, about drawing a line in the sand and showing that, Greek culture, Greek individuals have as much of a story to tell. Immigrants, migrants, like a lot of us and our families that came here, there's a story, and if you listen, if you watch, if you learn from that, it gives you a whole different perspective. And I think the last thing that I'll say, and I think we were talking about earlier, you touched a little bit on our friend Aunt Vula. I think if you take Aunt Vula and Aunt Frida, I think you said this earlier, put them in their own sitcom and call it
Greek Voodoo. Let me tell you something. That is probably one of the funniest scenes out there. I'm not going to get to it. You need to watch it. The Greek Voodoo scene. I know they show it in the trailer, but let me tell you something. When you actually understand its meaning and why they said it, I think we need like a Netflix series, like 6 episodes, that is Aunt Vula and Aunt Frida go back to Chicago and start a Greek dating service and call the service Greek Voodoo. Amazing stuff right there. Probably one of the funniest 2 minutes of the whole movie.
Yeah.
So once again, what's that?
No, I was going to say, and if you need extras, we'd be more than willing to be in the background.
Exactly. All right, guys, this concludes this episode of Baklava and Banter. I suggest every single one of you, if you have the opportunity, it doesn't have to be this weekend, go out, go watch Big Fat Greek Wedding 3. You're not going to be disappointed. I really, really think it's going to it's a great ending to this trilogy. I hope it is an ending. We don't need a 4th movie. Just let's put it to bed. But again, I'm Petraki.
And I'm Soto.
Have a great weekend, guys.
Yassas.